What happens when a beloved late-night host tries to have a serious conversation, only to be met with disrespect, entitlement, and shocking accusations? It only took one arrogant comment about American freedom for Prince Harry to get himself thrown off Jon Stewart's show in what witnesses are calling the most uncomfortable television moment in years. This was supposed to be a friendly interview. Jon Stewart, the sharp-witted comedian who Americans have trusted for decades, invited Prince Harry onto his show for what everyone thought would be a light conversation. Maybe they'd talk about charity work. Maybe they'd discuss life in California. Nobody expected what actually happened. The trouble started almost immediately. Jon welcomed Harry onto the stage with his usual warm smile, shaking his hand as the audience applauded. They sat down, and Jon opened with a simple question. "So, you've been living in America for a while now. How are you finding it?" Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. "Well, Jon, it's been quite the adjustment. You know, coming from a place with real history and culture." The audience went quiet. Jon's smile faltered for just a second. You could see him processing what he'd just heard. But being the professional he is, he pushed forward. "Real history and culture," Jon repeated slowly. "That's an interesting way to put it." Harry waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, you know what I mean. Britain has castles that are older than your entire country. We have traditions that go back centuries." Jon nodded, his jaw tightening. "Right. We've only got a couple hundred years of history. The whole Revolutionary War thing, the Constitution, fighting for civil rights. Small potatoes compared to castles." The sarcasm was crystal clear, but Harry seemed completely oblivious. He actually laughed. "Exactly. I mean, no offense, but you can't really compare the two." Jon shifted in his seat. The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension building. "None taken," Jon said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "So tell me, what made you decide to leave all that history and culture behind?" Harry's expression changed. His smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "That's a complicated question, Jon, and frankly, I'm not sure you'd understand." "Try me," Jon said flatly. "Well," Harry began, leaning forward now, "when you grow up in an institution like I did, with the weight of tradition on your shoulders, you start to see things differently. You lot over here, you don't really have that same sense of duty or responsibility." Jon's eyebrows shot up. "We don't have a sense of duty or responsibility." "Not like we do, no. Americans are very individualistic. Very me, me, me. In Britain, we understand service." The audience stirred uncomfortably. Someone actually gasped. Jon put his hands together, pressing his fingertips against his lips. He was thinking carefully about his next words. "That's a fascinating perspective," Jon finally said, "especially coming from someone who left their country and their royal duties to live in a mansion in Montecito." Harry's face flushed red. "That's completely different." "How?" Jon asked simply. "Because I left for the right reasons. I left to protect my family from a toxic institution and a vicious press." "Okay," Jon said. "But you just said Americans don't understand service or duty. Help me understand how leaving your responsibilities is different from the individualism you're criticizing." Harry stood up slightly in his seat, then sat back down. He was getting agitated. "You're twisting my words." "I'm using your words," Jon corrected. "You said we're all me. Me, me. You said we don't understand duty like you do. I'm just asking you to explain." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Harry said, his voice rising. "This confrontational American attitude. You invite someone on your show and then attack them." Jon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Attack you? I asked you to clarify a statement you made about 330 million people. You're being defensive." "I'm being defensive?" Jon leaned forward now, his voice calm but firm. "Harry, you came on my show and said Americans don't have real history or culture. You said we don't understand duty or service. And when I ask you to explain, I'm the one being defensive? Harry crossed his arms. I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate being told that the country I love, the country that my family fought for, the country where people died for the freedom you're currently enjoying, doesn't have real history or culture. The audience erupted in applause. Harry looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe people were clapping for Jon instead of supporting him. This is unbelievable, Harry muttered, but his microphone picked it up. What's unbelievable? Jon asked. This whole thing. You Americans, you're so sensitive. You can't take any criticism. Jon tilted his head. Criticism? You didn't offer criticism. You insulted an entire nation. There's a difference. I was simply stating facts. Facts, Jon repeated. Okay, here's a fact. America has 50 states filled with people who wake up every single day and work hard to build a life for themselves and their families. We have teachers, firefighters, doctors, soldiers, all serving their communities. But according to you, we don't understand service. Harry rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes. The camera caught it perfectly. That's not the same thing, Harry said dismissively. Why not? Jon demanded. Because they're not serving something bigger than themselves. They're just doing their jobs. The audience booed. Actually booed. Jon held up his hand to quiet them down. Did you just say that teachers and firefighters and soldiers are just doing their jobs? That they're not serving something bigger than themselves? Harry realized he'd made a mistake. You could see it on his face. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? I meant that it's not the same as serving your country at the highest level. It's not the same as representing your nation on the world stage. Jon stared at him for a long moment. You mean it's not the same as being born into wealth and privilege? That's not what I said. But that's what you meant, Jon pressed. You think service only counts if you're wearing a crown or a fancy uniform at a state dinner. The teacher who stays late to help struggling students, that doesn't count. The firefighter who runs into a burning building, that doesn't count. The single mother working 2 jobs to feed her kids, that doesn't count. You're putting words in my mouth, Harry protested. No, I'm interpreting the words that came out of your mouth. Harry stood up. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you. You're right, you don't, Jon said calmly, also standing. This is my show, and I don't have to sit here and let you insult my country and my audience. Insult your audience? I've done nothing but try to have an honest conversation, and you've attacked me at every turn. Jon laughed again, that same humorless laugh. An honest conversation. Is that what you call coming on here and telling us we have no culture, no history, no sense of duty? I was trying to provide perspective. Perspective, Jon said. From someone who spent their entire life being told they're special just because of who their grandmother was. That's the perspective you're offering. Harry's face was bright red now. How dare you? How dare I? Jon's voice rose. How dare you come into my studio, sit in that chair, and disrespect every person in this country who wakes up and tries to make the world a little bit better. This is outrageous, Harry said, looking around as if searching for support. Is anyone going to do something about this? Jon spread his arms wide. Do something about what? About me defending my country? About me standing up to someone who thinks they're better than everyone else because they were born in a palace? I never said I was better than anyone. You didn't have to say it. It's dripping from every word you've spoken since you sat down. Harry pointed at Jon. You know what your problem is? You can't handle the truth. Americans live in this bubble where they think they're the greatest country in the world, and you lose your minds when anyone suggests otherwise. We don't think we're perfect, Jon said. We know we have problems. We talk about them constantly. But we also know our history matters. We know our culture matters. We know that the people who built this country and the people who continue to build it every single day matter. I'm not going to stand here and be shouted at, Harry said. Then leave, Jon said simply. The studio went completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. What? Harry asked. I said leave. If you're not going to sit here, then leave. This is my show. And I'm not going to spend another minute giving a platform to someone who comes here and insults the people watching. Harry laughed, but it sounded forced. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You want to leave? There's the door. Harry looked at the audience, then back at Jon. You're actually kicking me off your show. You said you weren't going to stand here and be shouted at. I'm respecting your wishes. You're free to go. This is insane. What's insane, Jon said, his voice steady and controlled, is thinking you can come on television and trash an entire country and expect everyone to smile and nod. Harry shook his head. You'll regret this. I doubt it, Jon said. Do you know who I am? And there it was. The question that changed everything. The audience actually gasped this time. Jon just smiled. Yeah, I know who you are. You're the guy who's about to leave my show. Harry pointed at Jon again. You're making a huge mistake. People will hear about this. Good, Jon said. I hope they do. I hope everyone hears about how someone came on this show and disrespected this country. And I hope they hear about how I didn't just sit there and take it. You're nothing but a comedian, Harry spat. A court jester. That's all you'll ever be. Jon nodded slowly. Maybe. But this court jester has the guts to stand up to people like you. This court jester knows that being born into privilege doesn't make you special. This court jester understands that real service means lifting others up, not looking down on them. Harry's hands were shaking now. So this is the last time I try to have an intelligent conversation with Americans. If this is what you consider an intelligent conversation, Jon said, then yeah, maybe it should be your last. Harry turned to walk off the stage, then spun back around. You know what? You're all the same. You all think you're so special with your freedom and your democracy, but you don't know the first thing about real leadership or real responsibility. Jon walked closer to Harry, looking him directly in the eye. We know enough to fight for our freedom instead of expecting it to be handed to us. We know enough to elect our leaders instead of accepting them by birthright. We know enough to believe that every person, regardless of where they come from, has the same value and the same dignity. That's a nice speech, Harry said sarcastically. It's not a speech. It's what we believe. It's what this country was founded on. And if you don't like it, if you think we're all so beneath you and your precious traditions, then maybe you should go back to where you came from. The audience exploded in applause. Harry stood there, stunned. Are you telling me to leave America? Harry asked, his voice shaking. I'm telling you to leave my show, Jon said. What you do after that is up to you. Harry looked around the studio one more time. The audience was standing now, clapping and cheering. The cameras were all on him. He was trapped, and he knew it. Fine, Harry said. I'll leave, but this isn't over. Yeah, it is, Jon said simply. Harry ripped off his microphone, the sound creating feedback through the speakers. He threw it on the chair and stormed toward the exit. But before he got there, he turned back one more time. You people deserve each other, he shouted. Jon didn't respond. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching as Harry pushed through the studio doors and disappeared. The audience continued clapping, the sound filling the entire space. Jon walked back to his desk, sat down, and looked directly at the camera. His face was serious, more serious than anyone had seen him in years. We'll be right back, he said quietly. But the cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, capturing the moment as Jon put his head in his hands, taking a deep breath. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes. Not anger anymore. Something else. Maybe disappointment. Maybe sadness that it had come to this. The production assistants rushed onto the stage, unsure of what to do. The audience was still standing, still clapping. Some of them were chanting Jon's name, but Jon just sat there, staring at the empty chair across from him. One of the producers came over and leaned down to whisper something to Jon. He nodded, then stood up again. The audience quieted down. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Jon said. "That's not usually how we do things here. But I meant every word I said. This country isn't perfect. We have our problems. We have our challenges. But we don't have to sit here and let anyone tell us we don't matter. We don't have to smile and nod when someone disrespects everything we stand for." The audience erupted again. Jon held up his hands to quiet them. "I know some people will say I should have been more diplomatic, that I should have let it go, that I should have been the bigger person. But you know what? Sometimes being the bigger person means standing up. Sometimes it means saying enough is enough. Sometimes it means showing people the door when they've overstayed their welcome." More applause. Jon smiled, but it was a tired smile. "We really will be right back," he said. "I need a minute." The cameras finally cut to commercial. Backstage, the producers were in chaos. Nobody knew what to do. This had never happened before. Jon Stewart had just kicked a member of the royal family off his show, on live television, in front of millions of people. But out in the audience, something else was happening. People were talking to each other, sharing their reactions. Some were shocked. Some were thrilled. Some couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. But almost all of them agreed on one thing. Then Jon had done the right thing. When the show came back from commercial, Jon was calmer. He made a few jokes, tried to lighten the mood, but everyone could tell he was still processing what had happened. The rest of the show went by in a blur. Jon had other guests, but nobody remembers them. The only thing anyone remembers is what happened with Harry. As the show wrapped up, Jon gave his final thoughts. He didn't mention Harry by name. He didn't have to. "Look," Jon said, looking directly at the camera, "we all have disagreements. We all have different perspectives. That's what makes the world interesting. But there's a difference between having a different opinion and showing disrespect. There's a difference between offering criticism and insulting people. And when someone crosses that line, when someone uses their platform to put others down, we have a choice. We can stay quiet, or we can speak up. Tonight, I chose to speak up, and I'd make the same choice again." The audience gave him one final standing ovation. Jon thanked them, thanked his crew, and signed off. But as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, he collapsed back in his chair, exhausted. The producers surrounded him immediately. They wanted to know if he was okay. They wanted to know if he had any regrets. Jon just shook his head. "That guy came in here thinking he could say whatever he wanted because of his title," Jon said. "Thinking he was untouchable. Someone needed to show him that's not how it works here. In America, it doesn't matter who your family is. It doesn't matter what your last name is. You treat people with respect, or you face the consequences." One of the younger producers asked if Jon was worried about the backlash. Jon shrugged. "Maybe there will be backlash. Maybe there won't. But I can look at myself in the mirror tonight and know I stood up for what I believe in. That's worth more than any amount of good press or royal approval." The staff started breaking down the set. People were still buzzing about what happened. Everyone had their phones out, checking social media, watching the clips that were already going viral. The moment when Harry asked, "Do you know who I am?" was being shared everywhere. The moment when Jon told him to leave was becoming iconic. In the control room, the director was reviewing the footage. Every angle had captured the confrontation perfectly. Harry's eye roll, Jon's clenched jaw, the audience's reactions. It was riveting television, the kind of raw, unscripted moment that reminded people why live TV could be so powerful. Jon eventually made his way backstage, still processing everything. Members of the crew stopped him to shake his hand or pat him on the back. Everyone wanted to tell him they supported him, that he'd done the right thing, that they were proud to work for him. But Jon wasn't celebrating. He looked drained. The confrontation had taken something out of him. He'd meant every word he said, but that didn't make it easy. Going head-to-head with someone like that, on national television, knowing millions of people were watching, it was intense in a way that few things are. Someone asked Jon if he thought Harry would apologize. Jon just laughed. People like that don't apologize. They think they're entitled to say and do whatever they want. They think the rules don't apply to them. An apology would require admitting he was wrong, and I don't think he's capable of that. Another producer asked what Jon would say if Harry tried to come back. He won't, Jon said confidently. His pride won't let him. He'll tell himself that we're the problem, that Americans are too sensitive, that we didn't understand what he was trying to say. He'll never admit that he came in here with an attitude and got called out for it. The makeup artist who'd worked with Harry before the show spoke up. She'd been quiet until now. He was rude from the moment he arrived, she said. Treated everyone like servants. Didn't say please or thank you. Acted like being here was beneath him. Others nodded. The sound guy mentioned that Harry had complained about the quality of his microphone. The stage manager said Harry had demanded his chair be adjusted 3 times. Everyone had a story about Harry's entitled behavior. That's what gets me, Jon said. He comes in here acting superior to everyone, then gets upset when someone pushes back. He wants to dish it out but can't take it. Jon finally headed to his dressing room. He needed a moment alone. Inside, he sat down and stared at himself in the mirror. His tie was crooked. His hair was a mess. He looked like he'd been through a battle. In a way, he had. There was a knock on the door. Jon's head writer stuck his head in. "You okay?" he asked. Jon nodded. "Yeah, just needed a minute." "That was incredible," the writer said. "I've never seen you like that." "I've never had a guest like that," Jon replied. "Do you think you went too far?" Jon thought about it for a moment. "No. If anything, I wish I'd been tougher. That guy needed someone to tell him the truth. Everyone's probably been walking on eggshells around him his whole life. Maybe it's good that someone finally didn't." The writer smiled. "Twitter's going crazy. Everyone's on your side." "I don't care about Twitter," Jon said. But they both knew he did care, at least a little. Not about being popular, but about knowing that people understood why he'd reacted the way he did. Back in the studio, the crew was still cleaning up. The chair where Harry had sat was empty now, a reminder of what had transpired. Someone joked that they should put a plaque on it. Here sat the prince who got kicked off at Jon Stewart's show." Everyone laughed, but there was an edge to it. They all knew this was going to be talked about for a long time. Jon eventually emerged from his dressing room, ready to head home. He thanked everyone one more time, told them they'd done a great job handling an impossible situation. Then he walked out to his car, ready to leave the studio behind. But as he drove through the streets, he couldn't stop replaying the confrontation in his mind. Every word, every facial expression, every moment of tension. He wondered if he could have handled it differently, if he should have been more patient, if he should have tried harder to find common ground. But then he remembered Harry's dismissive wave when talking about American history. The eye roll. And the "do you know who I am?" And Jon knew he'd made the right call. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. When Jon got home, he turned on his phone. It had been off since the show ended. Immediately, it exploded with notifications, text messages, emails, missed calls. Everyone wanted to talk about what happened. He ignored most of them. But there was one message that caught his attention. It was from a teacher in Ohio. She wrote about how she'd watched the show with her husband, how they'd both been moved by what Jon said about teachers and service, how it meant something to her that someone had stood up and said their work mattered. Jon read the message 3 times. This was why he'd done it. Not for the viral clips or the headlines, but for people like that teacher. people who work hard every day and don't get enough recognition. People who deserve to be respected, not dismissed. Jon poured himself a drink and sat down on his couch. The house was quiet. His family was already asleep. He thought about the moment when Harry had stood up, ready to leave. There had been a split second where Jon could have backed down, could have smoothed things over, could have made a joke and moved on. But he hadn't. He'd doubled down. He'd made it clear that disrespect wouldn't be tolerated. And now, sitting alone in his living room, Jon felt at peace with that decision. Not proud exactly, not happy that it had happened, but certain that when faced with that choice, he'd chosen correctly.